Welcome to Ponchatoula Live, the show where we make it easy for you to connect with the people of Ponchatoula. I'm your host, Parker Layrisson, and today I've got a terrific guest. This is someone I'd never met until a few moments ago when we talked backstage, but I've been eager to meet her because I've heard so many people that I respect here in our community say nice things about her. She is the pastor of the First United Methodist Church, someone who's active in our community, doing great things, and I can't wait to hear about her compelling backstory, her plans to visit the Holy Lands, and much more. So with no further ado, I bring to you Reverend Deirdre Allen. Pastor Allen, welcome to the show.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, it's a pleasure to have you. Why don't we kick things off with you telling us a little bit about yourself?
Well, I often tell people that I'm a little bit of a gypsy because I've moved around from all sorts of places. I actually grew up in South Africa.
Wow, that's a first for this show.
Yeah, I was a tiny baby when my parents took me there. They had been working there for 20 years or so beforehand. And so most of my formative years were spent there. In the 70s, we moved back to the United States and settled in Jackson, Mississippi. And I graduated from high school there and went to college there, became a nurse. And eventually, after a lot of traveling around, ended up in Baton Rouge. And that's where I had a career change. I was a registered nurse for many years, and then a stay-at-home mom. And then I went back to school when my kids were in college and got my master's of divinity from Asbury Theological Seminary and became a pastor. So I really am a gypsy of sorts.
That's really neat. I mean, obviously you don't see that type of background every day, right?
That's right.
And so I'm sure it brings to you such a rich perspective to bring to your ministry, having been a mom, a nurse. I mean, the Lord knows there's no more important work than that, day to day. And here you are now able, to counsel folks and bring that background rather than just going straight into, the seminary at 20 years old or something and not really living, like you have. Well, tell us, if you would, what was it like? I mean, we're going to get to your ministry, your church, all the wonderful projects you have, the plans that y'all have to go to the Holy Land, etc. But I got to ask about life in South Africa, because here in Ponchatoula, that's something we don't see every day. What was it like growing up there, across the world?
It was interesting. My parents actually worked with the African people there, the Zulu people. They were in very rural situations, very backwoods areas. They were building wells and building schools, helping with education, and they were really there during the apartheid years when there was so much division and a lot of fighting and conflict in Africa. And it was the conflict that actually brought us back to the United States. I remember my parents I have two brothers and then a younger sister, and the three older kids, we all ended up in boarding school. So I grew up in German boarding school. But there was a lot of conflict, and there was a bombing of a railroad and a number of other things that happened. And my parents eventually decided, because the white people and the black people were fighting so much, that they were worried about their own safety and the safety of their children. So that's in part why we ended up back in the States. But
so you went to South Africa and then boarding school in Germany, you mentioned, right?
It wasn't. I was actually in a German boarding school in South Africa.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I got it.
Okay, that's okay. By the time I was school age, they sent us to boarding school because they were really like in the backlands. In Africa, no school, and of course they couldn't. White children and black children did not go to school together, so we were just sent to boarding school. So
that's so interesting. You're the second person to come on the show and talk about going to Africa. The last one, a good dear friend of mine, Joel DeSherry, went over there as an adult, not a kid like you, but he was kind of in the backwoods, if you would, trying to bring water wells and such to very rural communities, doing good work like your parents were doing. But when COVID hit, and that presented its own safety challenges with a family of 7. So it's neat to hear these stories kind of from around the world back here to little bitty Mayberry. So let's, Ponchatoula. If you would kind of give us the next chapter. Things get unsafe. You guys come back here. You mentioned Jackson, Mississippi. Tell us about that chapter in your life.
So my dad took a position at Reformed Theological Seminary. He did a lot of fundraising and that sort of thing for several years. And I went to high school and then ended up at Mississippi College. I graduated early. I was 16 when I graduated from high school, and
oh, wow.
And was blessed to have a scholarship to go to Mississippi College, and went there and with plans of becoming a nurse, which I did. I completed school there. But during my first year, my parents moved away. My dad took a church and became a pastor of a church in Indiana, and I never moved with them. So by the time I was 17, I was independent and living on my own, and sort of making my own way in the world, if you haven't.
Yeah.
And
probably the youngest nurse in the state of Mississippi. Heck, maybe the whole country.
Well, well, maybe, I don't know. I had never thought about that before. I was pretty young, that's for sure.
Wow.
I wanted to work in newborn intensive care, and I had just nursing school experience in the ICU, and went to Baptist Hospital, and I told them, I want to come here and work, and I want to work in the newborn intensive care. And they said, well, you have to have at least 2 years experience before we'll hire you. And I was like, why? And they were like, because you need experience. And I was like, no, I can learn all this. I will do everything. And eventually they hired me straight from nursing school into the newborn intensive care.
So your persistence
sort of set a precedent, if you will. Yeah.
I can't imagine these mothers with these newborns that they're so worried over. And then you come in with a baby face, barely 18, if that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
Well, what was that like? Because I have 2 children, and thank God we didn't need any neonatal NICU or anything like that. But they were both born about 3 weeks early, and that was scary enough for us as new parents. So, what did you learn, and what was that career like working with those youngsters and their parents?
I think one of the best parts of that is that you kind of develop a long-term, or at least a longer-term relationship with people that are having a newborn and are in the NICU, if you will. A lot of times now, if say you break your leg and you have to be in the hospital to have something done to it, you're home the next day and you hardly know the name of your nurse because they've come and gone so quickly. But in the newborn intensive care, I was working 12-hour shifts, and in a 12-hour period, you get to know families, you get to, visit with them, you get to hear their stories. And a lot of the parents were very, very afraid, and they didn't know what they could or couldn't do with a newborn. So you develop these really sweet and intimate relationships with not only your patient, but with the families. And I think that's what I loved most about it.
What's a day in the life like, though, in a 12-hour shift? Because that's a long day, but I'm also imagining in NICU, it's probably a pretty intense day, right? I mean,
it is, yeah.
High stakes there. Do you go home just dead to the world, needing to sleep immediately? Or, I mean, what's that like?
Well, I was also 20 years younger, which was helpful.
That helps.
And it was before I had children,
right,
which was also
right.
helpful. And I was, I mean, it's you get used to that rhythm. I work 3 days on and 4 days off, and 4 days on and 3 days off, and so you kind of get used to sleeping and going right back to work, and then having these long, lovely stretches off where you have all sorts of time. I was trying to make ends meet back then, and I was also willing to work anytime they had an availability for me to work. My parents weren't wealthy. They didn't pay for me to go to school. Like I said, I was fortunate because I had an academic scholarship, but I was willing to work for any time there was a job. I was ready to go. So I loved working, and I'm still a little bit of a workaholic. Maybe
That's
a type
good.
A personality,
Well,
right?
that's good because a pastor's work never ends. I mean, you're in a 24/7 profession now. Speaking of pastors, and you mentioned your family, obviously your father was, minister before you. What was that like growing up as a preacher's kid? Did you know early on that one day you might want to do this, or how did that in the early stages, impact you?
Yeah, so I grew up in well, my parents were Wesleyan, which is a lot like the Nazarene church, very conservative, and
Hmm.
women did not become clergy. But I remember my dad wishing that one of my brothers, I had two brothers that were older than me, him saying, "I hope one day one of my boys becomes a pastor." My dad was a pastor, my grandfather was a pastor, and my great grandfather was a pastor. So there was this sort of legacy, almost an expectation that,
Yes.
that one of them would be a pastor. And it's kind of sad because my parents both passed away rather young. My
Hmm.
mom was 62 and my dad was 64. And I didn't go to seminary until after they died. And so I often think about, I wonder what my parents would say now that it wasn't a son, but a daughter that went into ministry, which is, kind of interesting or, yeah.
Absolutely. And I mean it's neat. I'm sure who knows, parts of them would swell with such pride at seeing that
I think
transformation
so.
in
I
action.
think so.
And that would be so neat to know. And one day you guys can reunite
That's
upstairs
right.
and you'll find out. But
Yeah, so I went
that's
to,
neat.
when I was about 14, we were living in Mississippi, and I went to a church, a revival service, if you will. And
Mhm.
I had this sense that maybe God was calling me to pastoral ministry. And the guy that was preaching at the time, he said, "Well, you should go talk to your pastor." And I did. And the pastor said to me, God would not call a woman to pastoral ministry. It was the tradition I was in. And I think, in a lot of, Jesus didn't start his ministry till he was in his 30s. So
Mhm.
I think maybe it was a good thing that I didn't go into pastoral ministry when I was really young. I feel like my life experience brought me to such a time as this. And I've gained so much, raising children and becoming a nurse and all the life experiences that happen to us, right? I think they have brought me to become a better pastor, a
Yeah,
better
I'm sure.
shepherd.
That makes perfect sense. And if you would give us a little bit of history and background on the issue of women in pastoral ministry. My experience is limited. I grew up Catholic, and of course, there's no women priests. But I do remember well when I got to law school, I had a professor, a brilliant professor named Howard L'Enfant, who, like me, was Catholic. He was a product of Jesuit high school and Loyola University and law school in New Orleans and very steeped in his religion. A religious guy. We got to know each other well. He would come out, visit with my parents and me, and come to our farm sometime for picnics or whatnot. But his daughter became an Episcopal priest when I was in law school. And I remember how proud he was of her. To me at that time, I'm 20 years old, paying no attention to, I didn't study any kind of theology. It seemed like, a Martian concept to have a female priest because I only knew my little 20 years of Catholic upbringing at that time. But if you will, give me a little background because I would imagine many folks in our community may be as ignorant as I am as to, what churches allow for that and what don't. And if you would just kind of address that topic because you're the first we've had on this show and certainly the most knowledgeable.
Yeah, I still think there are places where it's harder being a female clergy person. Um, but there have certainly in the Methodist Church, I think in the 1950s, they started ordaining women as clergy in the United Methodist Church. Um, so my experience after that time when I was 14, I kind of didn't go much to any church. And then I started trying lots of churches. And there was so many things about churches that I loved, but maybe didn't exactly fit me. I love the traditions of the Roman Catholic Church. There's a sacredness when you enter the worship space. I love the music of the Pentecostal. I'm a big music fan, and I love music, and I love good music. But I walked one day into a United Methodist church, and standing at the front of the church was a black clergyman and a white clergy woman. It was the first white clergy woman I had ever encountered. And I was hooked, just fascinated that in the Deep South, we could have a man and a woman of different races working together to bring about a message of love and hope. And I never left the Methodist Church after that. But I think it is still hard. I went and visited a church several years ago, and a gentleman met me there, and he said, I don't believe in women clergy. And I often pray and say, oh, God, give me some words. And I said, I didn't either, but God seemed to have other plans for my life. And so you should take that up with him. And so that's generally my response now when people say, oh, woman clergy, and I don't know.
Yeah.
Maybe that's not a good answer, but I think women still have a hard time being clergy. It's a tough spot.
I appreciate your candor, and you are a trailblazer of sorts, because it is somewhat new, at least to this area.
Right, definitely.
But I tell you what, your description of the various faiths reminds me of an excellent program I once was blessed to participate in at your church years before you became pastor. They did a program on, I think it was called Christianity's Family Tree, by a Reverend Adam Hamilton, if I recall.
Yes.
Are you familiar with it?
Yes, I am.
It was wonderful. I just went because I had some dear friends in the church, and they invited me. The Lanes, Professor Kate Lane. Of course, her mother, Miss Valerie, is one of my favorite people in town. Just great folks. I can't remember who initially invited me, whether it was them or who, Jane Hextall, perhaps. Lots of friends were there. But it was great because rather than proselytize for his faith, which I think was Methodist, like you, I could be wrong.
Yes, he is. Yeah.
He talked about, he extolled the virtues of each Christian faith as he walked you through one lesson in what Pentecostals are into, and Catholics and Baptists and whatnot. And I've been at a point in my life where I've been raised Catholic and been Catholic all my life, but I married a Baptist, and I now spend more Sundays in her pews than mine. And it's really given me a lot of perspective there, because I do think we need to remember we may be in different pews on Sunday, but we're all worshiping Christ. And I think we have far more similarities than differences in the Christian faith. And I think you Methodists are better perhaps at getting that right and unifying, or attempting to, than maybe some of the others. Because I know, my dad tells me about being raised at St. Joseph. In his day, they were a little harsher with it, but it was like, man, your non-Catholic friends are not going to heaven. And the Baptist kids across town were being told a similar thing about the Catholics. And
right.
I don't want to get into that debate today, but, from my measure, I think it's helpful to basically learn about all of them and try to look for the good things. Because you're right. I've been in a lot of different churches over the years, and the music's better. Catholics maybe have the prettiest cathedrals in the world, but we don't have the best music. So I love your take there. Would you mind sharing, before we get into your church, because I would love to ask about what y'all are up to, and I've heard so many great things about the kind of renaissance of First United Methodist here in Ponchatoula. Tell us, if you will, a little bit about the chapters in your life. You mentioned nursing, but tell us about family, because you seem to me like someone who's really a family woman. Your face lights up when you talk about your late parents and, your siblings, and you mentioned raising kids. Tell us a little, and I know it's date night for you and your husband tonight. I don't know if should have shared that or not, but I'll get you out of here in time to go to dinner with your hubby. But tell us about the chapter in your life as a wife, as a mother, and what family means to you.
I absolutely love my family. I was privileged to have really wonderful parents in lots and lots of ways. And I still have a sister that lives in Alexandria now, which is awesome. She's not that far away.
Yeah.
And I have a brother that lives in Kentucky. And then we have a blended family of 6 kids and 1 girl in the midst.
It's a Brady bunch.
Yeah. And they're kind of spread all over the place. I have one son that's in Baton Rouge. He's a computer engineer. And another son that's in Conroe, Texas. He's a physician, and a daughter that is in Lafayette that is a teacher. She teaches high school. And then one in Colorado that manages a whole slew of nursing homes. One in Springfield that lives really close to us that manages a bakery. And the last one is in Zachary, and he works for a paper factory thing. I'm not exactly sure what he does.
Well, you know what? You have just described in more detail your 6 children better than I probably could. My 2 kids. So, one's 10 feet away in the next room. What advice would you give the parent? Because clearly your kids are doing well. I mean, we all have bumps and ups and downs in life, and life's about much more than careers. But you have succeeded in getting them out into the world as productive people, that are providing for themselves and their families. And if you wouldn't mind, share a little bit of advice for either old folks like me that started late and have young kids, or young parents who are getting going in their 20s or whatever. But what do you think is the secret sauce to being a good mom or good dad?
Wow, I'm not sure I have a secret sauce, but I guess, loving our children unconditionally. I've certainly gone through a lot of struggles with my kids too. They always knew where I stood on an issue. And even if we disagreed, we did it in love. And while they lived at my house, they knew that they had to abide by the rules that we set for them. And when they moved out, they made their own choices. Right. Sometimes they've made choices that I disagreed with, and they know it. But I still love them. I mean, and sometimes it's really hard, as parents, we come with a perspective of time and age on our side. Mm-hmm. We often don't think of that as a positive, but we do when we look at our children and we know the things that can hurt them or bring them grief and sorrow in their lives, and they want to try it. They think they're invincible. They think they can do it all, and we know that they're not going to be able to without being hurt somewhere along the way. And, I don't know, finding balance, I guess. Lots of prayers.
No, hey, absolutely. That's all wonderful advice. If you would share with us something you like or love about your husband, because we all know in churches, that first spouse, that's a tough job. I think of, Miss Kathy Cranford over at First Baptist, one of the most wonderful ladies in Ponchatoula. My kids just love her. But I'm sure it's tough being a preacher's wife. Your husband is in the preacher's, husband category. And, but the same dynamic applies, that when you get called out for duty, whether it's an, unexpected, death or any kind of counseling for parishioners. I mean, so we know what time you're going to be on the pulpit, come Sunday, right? But there are these million little things that can happen during the week that take you away from your family. So why don't we appreciate your husband a little bit here while we're on here? Tell us about him or what you love about him.
Yeah, he is an amazing individual. He's a cyclist, and he does these MS rides. I think it's 150 miles that he does. I think this will be his 15th year to ride for MS. He has a passion to do ministry as well, not in the same way that I do, not preaching behind the pulpit, but you'll often see him at the church doing things like pressure washing the building to make it beautiful, or hanging blinds in my office because the sun is so hot in there. He's celebrating me coming tonight, and he called me today and he said, I'm going to take you out to dinner so we can celebrate. So we're having a lovely date night tonight. But he's definitely my champion. He supports me in this work and is willing. We moved from Baton Rouge to Ponchatoula and sold a home, and some of that kind of thing is very sad.
For sure.
But we have committed to this community, and we eventually bought our own home here, and we want to be a part of this place and these people's lives, and do something really good at this church.
Yeah.
And he has always been my champion, so I'm grateful for that.
Well, what a blessing. So let's talk about your church. So many of us that have grown up here in Ponchatoula have fond memories of the Methodist Church. I think of my first is kind of crystal clear in my mind. And that is that I remember when growing up, parents are always dying for some place to put their kids to get a few hours of relief. And they had an exceptional kind of summer camp program of, babysitting and playtime and whatnot. But I remember that the summer I spent, or at least the first summer I spent at First United Methodist, was the summer I had my kangaroo shoes. And any kid in the 1980s will remember that's the little sneakers that had a zipper pouch where you could fit a quarter or two. And that's the one place I remember showing off a quarter in my kangaroos. And from there to watching my dad's best friend eulogize his mother, which perhaps the best eulogy I've ever seen. So many other, weddings, etc., have happened in that building. From old families, like I mentioned earlier, like the Lanes and the Hextals that have been there forever, to new members that maybe have come on your watch. Tell us about your church and all the great things y'all are doing there.
Yeah, so I think I came as a surprise to them. Now they had a female clergy before me, and so I didn't actually had to, face being the first female clergy, which I was grateful for. But I'm certainly very different from the previous pastor. I'm very much the extrovert, and I like things happening, and I like people, and the church had been closed because of COVID. And so when I came, we started opening up windows and doors, even metaphorical ones, if you will. And I wanted to, and I still want to open our church for the community, for this community. We started, I just did my State of the Church address, and there were so many things that we did last year. We had a study that served over 50 people came to that study. We've had a big splash day on the front of the church yard for kids. We invited everybody in the neighborhood. I think people are still a little reluctant to mingle. There's still some fear of COVID out there.
Yeah, I think you're right.
But I'm working really hard to move past that.
That's great. Now, I know one of the big projects you have coming up is a trip to the Holy Land in 2024, the first part of next year. Is that right?
Yes, and I'm so excited.
Please tell us about it.
We're going with a group called Educational Opportunities, and I've actually traveled with them before, and they do just an amazing job of sort of scheduling everything out for you and making sure you're at the right spots at the right times. And, to be able to say that you walked where Jesus walked is just a once in a lifetime opportunity. Fortunately, I get to go again, and I've been before, so this will be my second time to go there. And I'm so excited to take others with me and to see these places again, to do the Via Dolorosa, the Way of the Cross, and see that firsthand, and see the temple and the Mount of Olives, and just all these wonderful places that we read about in Scripture. And once you're really there in person, it just brings it to life in a way that you can never do otherwise. So I'm super excited. I hope some of your viewers will decide to come and join us.
That's what I want to ask about. So if folks are my question one is it open to folks of other denominations?
Absolutely. It's
so
open to
if folks are
anybody.
Interested, how should they reach out to you, or what's the best way to contact you or the organization to
probably contacting the church office.
Okay.
We've got some brochures, and it shows you how you can sign up. Everything's online now, so you can sign up now, and they make it real easy. You can just do monthly payments until it's time to go, and it really is all inclusive. They even feed you 2 meals a day. That's included in the price of it. Your airfare is included, and your hotel rooms are included. So yeah, it's a great opportunity. Yeah, just contact the church office or
Yeah.
come by and we'll give you a brochure and you can
We'll
sign
do
it.
our best to get the info on the church office info in the comments below if folks can't, find it. I'm sure it's easy to Google or look up the church.
Absolutely.
That's really neat because any person I've ever talked to that's been there comes back like you did, just face a glowing, talking about the once in a lifetime impact. I see our producer, Danny Lynn Dennis, has shared a link to your church there. So thank you, Danny Lynn. That's
Awesome.
very
Thank you.
what I'll do here is I'll put that up on the screen here for a moment for folks to look at, but also you can click on it if you go to the comments. But it's also, I think, an intimidating place to travel. I love to travel with my wife, and we've been fortunate enough to get out of the country a few times. But to me, it's a little scarier going into the Middle East than it is going to Paris, or Canada. And so there is some kind of, I think, comfort in knowing you're going with a group that's been there, done that. Like you say, the kind of all-inclusive nature really probably makes it easy. You don't have to learn a foreign language, perhaps, to learn about how to get there. You just kind of have to follow, the pastor here or somebody else in the group who's going ahead of you. Danny Lynn's also been kind enough to share here not only the physical address and mailing address, but the phone number and email of the church. So that's also in the comments. Thank you for doing that, Danny. What a wonderful trip. If you would, obviously it was a profound impact on you to go to the Holy Lands the first time. When you think back to that trip, what are the first things that kind of come to mind as you recollect it?
Probably the thing that stood out most to me was to see the Wailing Wall, the old temple wall.
Yeah.
And it's very interesting because there's a section for the men and then there's a itty bitty section for the women. And there's hundreds and hundreds of women at the Wailing Wall.
Really?
And there's probably, 20 men at the men's section. And it is in a lot of ways reflective of faith in general. It seems like women are becoming the leaders of the churches and are becoming the movers. Not that they haven't always been, but I'm seeing it more coming to the forefront, maybe because I'm in that role now too. It was just profound to be at that wall and to think about all the prayers that are lifted up, across denominational lines, across time, how many thousands of people have wrapped up little prayers and poked them into the cracks of those walls, and leaving my own there,
Wow.
was pretty profound.
Profound. Yeah, what an experience. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Well, you clearly love what you do as a pastor. Tell us a little bit about what you love about your job. I mean, what is it that gets you so excited? Because from our pre-air interview where we just kind of sat down and got to know each other for 5 minutes, throughout this extended interview, it's clear to me that you love this and it energizes you, right? So
Absolutely.
where does that energy come from, and what's feeding that goodwill and feeling that I'm detecting here?
If we had a few weeks to talk about the many struggles that I have gone through in my own life personally,
Right.
It makes me appreciate the struggles that other people go through. And I think too many times the church has been a place to not lift us up, but to bring us down, to make us ashamed of our past or ashamed of something that we endured or some struggle that we didn't handle well, maybe. And I feel like God's call in my life is to bring good news to people, to bring hope, to share this message of redemption and good news. And it has to bring about a life of wholeness and holiness, yes, but to bring us to a good place. The prophet, I think it was Jeremiah, said, "The plans I have for you are to prosper you." And I never have thought about that as financial prosperity. I've thought about it as bringing about a prosperity of wholeness, of wellness, of living a life of joy, finding the acceptance in somebody, and helping them to see that in themselves. And I guess that's my call. That's my call to be with people and just look at their face and say, I see you. And what I see is an amazing human being.
Yeah.
Nobody else has been created exactly like you. God counted every hair on your head, and he loves you just the way you are. And if I could share that message and make people believe, I wish I could make people believe, but at least share that message of hope with people. I think that's my calling.
That's really special. Well, speaking of those people that you see and appreciate, we have one who's chimed in here, Nancy Duvick. Okay. And Nancy says that she loves and appreciates you and your husband, Paul, and they are so happy that you've come to the church. Nancy, thank you for chiming in. So good to hear from you. And if anybody else is watching and you'd like to converse with the pastor live while we're on the air here, I'm happy to share your comment. We have the ability to do that. But,
I love Miss Nancy too. She's an amazing part of our church, and she's in ministry just as much as I am.
Well, the Duvick family is one of the best in Ponchatoula. They've been around forever. Across the aisle in another pew, Andy Duvick, who grew up like me, Catholic, and we went to St. Joseph together, been a lifelong dear friend. He's doing hardwood floors at my house right now. He's the best hardwood floor guy you'll ever see. But the Duvick family is just one of the best here in Ponchatoula, and Nancy's a great exemplar of them. I asked you in your career as a nurse what a day in the life was like. I'd love to ask a similar question here as a preacher, and I know no 2 days as a pastor are probably the same. So maybe why don't we start with the easy one? What's your average Sunday like? And then you can give us other kind of day in the life experiences, because I think people appreciate learning about your profession maybe in ways we don't see. Everybody sees you, whether you're giving a eulogy or a sermon, we all know that part of the job, right? We grew up in the pews listening to that. But what else goes into it?
Yeah, I think Sundays is a lot what people see. That's the day I get up and I give a message. But at the church now, we plan worship, right? We plan for the music, and I'm very involved in the music. I'm grateful for my music minister, John Hawley, and then I have a wonderful pianist as well, Amy Fairburn, and then I have a guy that I wish he would let me hire him, Philip. He's an amazing organist, so we've started playing the organ sometimes as well. But a lot of planning goes into Sunday morning worship. I want the children to be involved, so that's always a cacophony of fun, because you never know what the children will do in the children's message. But yeah, it's the day when I'm all out there and I put it all out, and I usually go home and I'm exhausted. Frequently I get a Wesleyan hour, is what I call it, on Sunday in the afternoon. I go horizontal, if you will, but I call it a Wesleyan hour.
Wesleyan hour. That's a nice
Wesleyan hour. Yeah.
A good old fashioned nap. They just tell you that.
That's right. A nap. The
rest
of my week and my days are really good for somebody who is ADHD, if you will, because I bounce from one thing to another. Today I was working on a funeral. I was working on my Sunday message. I was working on a bulletin. I was working on a state of the church address. And, and then there's the occasional people that pop into my office to share some concern or whatever's on their mind, perhaps a hospital visit on the way home. But yeah, I've learned to be adaptable, to be able to flip from one thing to another. I guess that's the biggest challenge, if you will. I'm so grateful that I have a great staff, and staff appreciation is this Friday. And I've been thinking about what to do to appreciate my staff, and that all of those things happen in the day of a life of a pastor.
That's a full plate.
And somewhere I have to go grocery shopping and cook and, all the normal things, wash the clothes. I threw a load of clothes in before I came here.
That's great. I appreciate your candor there. Well, look, I promised you I'd get you out of here in time to make date night with Paul. And
that's right.
But before we do, what else should we know about you? What else would you like to share about yourself and your background?
Gosh, what else would I like to share? You know, I'm grateful to be in this community. I keep telling my church I'm committed to stay, to being here for the long haul. I would love to see this church thrive, not just make it. I would love to see them grow and expand and do more ministry and do more outreach in this community. We had a wonderful visioning session a few months ago with some of the leadership in our church. And they had some great dreams and thoughts about what we could be doing here in Ponchatoula. And so that is, I guess that's my hope, you know, that I would stay here, not just for a year or 2 years, but for the long term and see this church grow and be what it could be, because we are centrally located and the potential, the growth around here is amazing.
Yes.
And
you have a great
like
campus and great core families that have been there.
Absolutely.
And now they're blessed with great, you know, fresh young blood leadership here, which
Absolutely.
we're in dire need of. So that's wonderful. So Pastor Allen, thank you for coming on our show. Thank you for coming to our community. Thanks for investing in your own, you know, blood, sweat, and tears in the form of buying a house and moving your family here. And we appreciate it. One of the things I love about Ponchatoula, and one of the reasons I do this show, is we have this incredible blend of families like mine that have been here since the 1800s and folks like you that may have moved in last year, last month, whatever. And we need both to continue this kind of special mix we have going on here, right?
Absolutely.
So it's really neat to get to know you a little bit, to have you on the show. If I can ever help you in any way through my law firm, through my family, you know, personally, please do not hesitate to call on me. To our viewers, once again, I'm going to share the contact information for Reverend Allen as well as her church here. If you're interested in going to the Holy Land with her, getting involved in the church, volunteering in some of their outreach, or, you know, good that they're doing in the community, please give her a call, give her an email, etc. I know she would welcome that. And with that, before we go, is there anything else you want to share with our viewers?
All right, one more thing. We're having Lenten lunches. And I love this because every Wednesday at 11:30, we have a small worship service. Sometimes it's led by the Presbyterians, sometimes the United Methodists, the Roman Catholics. Who knows who might show up? So very ecumenical service is only about 20-25 minutes. And then we have a meal together, which is free. And I would invite everybody to come. It has been such a wonderful, wonderful time to get to know each other and to get to know the people in this community. So if you're available on Wednesdays during Lent, come and join us.
Hey, you had me at free food. No, but that's wonderful. Thank you for that invitation. To our guests, thank you for tuning in. And to Pastor Allen, we thank her for being on the show. We'll see you guys next week.